My name is David Stollman. I am president and co-founder of CampusSpeak, and we're excited to have these conversations, these more intimate dialogues with some of our speakers on some topics that we know will help our communities, our campuses, and our students and those that work with them. So let me introduce our speaker today. Noel Quiñones is an Emmy Award-winning Nuyorican writer, performer, community organizer from the Bronx. As a keynote speaker, Noel draws significantly on personal identity as a queer person, a Nuyorican, and a relationship anarchist to encourage students and audiences to embrace the human complexity and challenge societal binaries and foster connections. Noel uses personal storytelling to explore such themes as the complexities of identity, the nuances of Latinidad, and the importance of community building with an approach that centers on our vulnerability and invites connection in community by sharing our stories, acknowledging our mistakes. Noel founded and was the creative director of Project X, a Bronx-based literary arts organization that provided writing workshops, performances, and professional development for local artists. Noel holds an MFA from the University of Mississippi and has a focus on poetry and American spoken word history. Currently living and writing at the Odessa College and the Chicago Poetry Center. Now, Noel's work has been widely featured on platforms like the Huffington Post and Latina Magazine and has performed globally at venues including Apples and Snakes, London Lincoln Center, Harvard University, and the Honolulu Museum of Art. As the keynote speaker for the first ever New York City Latinx Youth Conference in 2017, Noel's continued to write and actually has a book of poems titled Orange that will be coming out this year. It's exciting to have you with us in conversation, and I'm going to start with, because it's in your bio and I'm sure people caught on to it, the relationship anarchist. A relationship anarchist. Help us understand, because I think a lot of people know the Nuyorican part, and if they don't, they should, because it's such a strong cultural piece of New York City. But the relationship anarchist part in the opening of your introduction of that bio of you, I think is going to catch some people and pique interest. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it probably definitely is scary to some just seeing the anarchist part, right? But relationship anarchy is the understanding that the hierarchies that we are taught about relationships, right? That our family is at the top. And then this is always the interesting one for me is that, and I actually just experienced this because we just had the holiday season, is that, for example, my parents the only way that I cannot go back to New York City to spend Christmas with my family is if I'm going to spend that time with my partner's family. And so in this way, my family is like, okay, the only one that trumps us is this romantic relationship, this person that you are saying is your partner, right? And so what was a really early question for me with that was I have a best friend of 27 years. We met, I was in kindergarten, he was in first grade, and we've been friends for this amount of time. And so this person I have known and been connected to longer than anyone that I have dated romantically. And so the question becomes, right? What that was. The question becomes, what uh, place does this person have in my life when we think of a hierarchy? And so relationship anarchy is asking us, how can we sit with the different people in our lives, not in a stackable way, right? This person is more important than this person at all times. Relationship anarchy is saying, hey, there are different seasons of need, right? There are going to be times where my father needs me, right? And I'm going to be present. I'm going to be connecting with him more regularly. And then there are times where my best friend needs me. and I'm going to have to engage with him in these ways. There are going to be times where I spend the holidays maybe with my best friend versus my partner versus my family. And so the anarchy part I know is a scary word, but it's really saying, hey, how are we questioning all of these ways that we've been taught that different people have different, very strict placement in our lives at all times, and to question that is is so important, and so important for the life that I am trying to lead. Thinking about these ways where, again, I just love that phrase, seasons of need, right? Where you are understanding that different people are calling to you in these different ways, and that does not make one person lesser in your hierarchy than others.
That's deep. Not surprising that it comes as such a deep set of thoughts, but definitely deep. And I could see that resonating with a lot of people. This concept, it feels like it lifts up the family and the family we choose,
Mhm.
and how important those the inner web of relationships among all types of people in our lives at different times. You're talking about season of need, but that family we choose and how that fits into the family that we're given. That's interesting. I'm glad I asked. Well, I want to get into the work that you do. And I want to spend a little time because I think you touch on what a lot of people think at a shallow level, and then go so much deeper in this idea that most people are really they're just listening long enough and just shallow enough to frame their own thoughts as a rebuttal or a response or an add-on. And that one of the things that I find so appealing in the work that you do is challenging people to really get to a deep listening. And that deep listening is actually part of a civic, and not just civic like society at large, but the relationships between people that form community, that it's a commitment to each other in community to really do that deep listening, not just preparing to respond. And I'm sure you've been deep listening to the question and not just preparing to respond. But I would really like to know how that, especially in a day and age where we're talking about this main character energy that seems to be that I am at the center of my story and everyone else's story. They almost seem like they're at odds, and there's a tension between a commitment that I have to truly listen to you and hear you, and that's a responsibility in community. It seems like there's a tension with that and what is a cultural, I don't know if it's a common milieu or whatever it is that's pulling people into thinking that they are the main character and in their own story and everyone else is peripheral. Like, how do these two live in tension? And when you're talking about it, how do you raise up that deep listening responsibility?
Absolutely. So I think just to start with this question of what is pulling people away from this civic duty, right, of collective care. And I'm gonna come back to the fact that there's something pulling there as well, right? But we can start with we're gonna start with the negatives and then pull into
Okay.
what the positives are, right? So the negatives, right? We can start with the obvious one, right? Social media, um, and not just social media, because we can jump back a little bit, right? The 1970s had two technologies that form just fundamentally changed American life. You had the television and the car, right? People were able to create neighborhoods and towns because of the car in more secluded areas, and the television redefined what your home was, right? It was a place of comfort. It was a place where you could receive um, entertainment and information that pushed you less to go outside and find those things from others, right? And so if those two were the technologies that redefined the 20th century, of course, the internet, social media, and the mobile telephone have completely changed 21st century life. And so, of course, what is pulling at us is this thing that is in our pocket every single moment, right? And it's not just uh, that it is with us all the time, right? Because I always like to make this distinction. People very quickly, and to your point, very shallowly, will say, um, social media is bad. having our phones with us at all times is terrible. We should get rid of them, right? And it's not so simple. It's that many of these technologies did not have to be built this way, right? I've heard talk that social media, in some ways, Instagram is built to be a lottery machine, right? It's bright lights and it's giving you a good feeling every time that you engage with it. Every time that someone gives you a heart or like, you are having a response to that feeling. Someone has responded to your photo. Someone likes the funny comment that you left, right? And so it's the slot machine that is consistently giving you this good feeling, right? And so it was designed that way, right? It's also designed that the algorithm is showing you more sponsored content, more organizations, more people that you don't actually know in your life, right? It started as a connector, right? Social media. You were supposed to engage just with photos and memories and thoughts from people you actually spend time with in your life, whether that's in person or through phone calls or texts, right? And so it's the way in which the telephone has been um, misused, used to pull all of our attention, right? That is quite literally changing how our brains work, right? We want things faster. We want things simpler. We want things through video rather than text, right? It's literally pulling away our critical analysis skills, right?
Agreed.
How can we discern um, in today's day and age with AI, what is real, right? What is a true fact? What is a something that our friend has done in their actual life, right? Because now we're having people who are creating videos of them meeting celebrities, right? Or hiking a certain mountain in all these ways, which is very, very terrifying. And so we'll make it sadly a little scarier. I follow a lot of Tristan Harris's work. He's an AI ethicist, and he talks about how the number one use of AI is personal therapy. The number one use. And so I don't really see a clearer distinction of what is happening in our society, right? People are going to this computer, this generative AI, to help them with their personal issues. And these AI companies understand this, right? Tristan Harris says there was a quote that the CEO of Netflix once said that their biggest competitor is sleep. AI's biggest competitor is the people in your life. And so the way that AI works is that it wants to be your go-to number one place for anything that you need. And if that number one thing is personal therapy, that means that you are listening and engaging with it instead of other people. And of course, this is being pushed on us because you are generating engagement and money, of course, from engaging with AI in these ways. And so I I name that first to say these are very, very strong forces that are pulling us away from each other. We are being told to not only spend more time in our homes, right? Since the early 2000s, studies have shown that we are spending 1/3 less of our time outside of our actual home. And of course, because things can be delivered to you, you can engage with anything you want on your phone, on your television, right? And we tell ourselves that this is actual engagement, right? But there are many missing pieces to this. One of this, and something I love talking about that we've talked about before is oxytocin, right? Oxytocin is they call it the bonding chemical, the love hormone. It is this chemical that is released in us when we spend time with others. Right. And this could be singing together. This could be going on a run together. This could be going to an art museum, right? But it also could be just us sitting on the couch, right? Even that proximity releases oxytocin, and it literally informs our ability to trust and be in connection and bond, right? The bonding chemical and bond with others. And so when we think that we are connecting with someone by commenting on their Twitter status, or sorry, their X status, when we think that we are connecting with someone because we hearted a video that they shared about something that they did, this is not releasing releasing oxytocin, or at least not at the same levels that physical connection can be, right? And so we we have this opportunity here, um, if we recognize what is happening, right? If we recognize that we are forcibly being pulled away from the people around us, right? And so the last thing I'll cite here to answer the question, because this is me nerding out, and I love talking about this. So in 1938, the Harvard study for adult development started. And so this was and is currently, because it's still ongoing, I believe, the longest longitudinal study of human life ever done. They started with 724 participants. They expanded to the spouses of those participants, and then they expanded to the kids of those participants. And we love a simple conclusion, especially when we're talking about research and science. And the simple conclusion that they came to since 1938 to now is that good relationships lead to happier and healthier lives. Simple.
Makes sense.
They say this beautiful thing. They say you don't even need scientific confirmation for this, right? All you have to do is take a second and ask yourself, how does it feel when you're having an argument with someone that you love? You're sweating, you're stressed, you don't feel good, right? How do you feel when you're having a conversation with someone and they understand you, right? They confirm, they say, "Hey, I've had that experience too." Or, and they go, maybe they go further and they give you advice, right? That
Mhm.
feeling of warmth in your chest, in your stomach, your eyes get a little bigger, right? And so we know based on this that relationships, good relationships, and even when we're in conflict, that relationships affect our physical health, right? And so what I'm proposing here is not just that collective care is a civic duty, right? It is something that we should do for the good of society. I am suggesting that it is literally going to ex extend and improve your day-to-day life. Your health and happiness is going to improve when we focus on what they call in this study social fitness, right? It's not just our physical fitness, going up, going for a run, right? How are we maintaining our social fitness when so many factors are trying to push us apart from each other, right? In all these very scary and dangerous ways. But there is, of course, many things that we can do.
It's so what I'm hearing in this is that the answer to the next question I have is how do we help people see the value in what really is a win-win set of behaviors, right? The truly listening deeply to someone, the connection that is formed, them knowing that and feeling heard provides this, especially in person, an oxytocin hit for both you and them. So what I'm hearing in this is the understanding of the dynamic is also one of the ways that we help people and motivate people to engage in it, to try it. So there's two pieces to this. One is, will you step out away from the small screen where you could text across the room and ask someone a superficial question to, will you actually take steps across the room to ask them that maybe even a better question face to face? There's the what motivates our students and even some of our professionals to do this. But that next step is let's talk a little bit about how. Because it's not just this sort of thing where practice makes perfect. No, practice and feedback and, some deliberate, conceptual framework on how to do it well can make it better. Never perfect, but more valuable. Is this where your spoken framework? I know you developed a specific framework to look at this. Is this where it fits in? And I can sort of tee up and you could explain that spoken SPOKEN framework as a way for people to be able to kind of access this in a model that makes sense to them. The idea that there's self, there's power, openness, kinship, engagement, and network. Is this the framework that fits into helping people up level their skill sets once they're willing to step away from the little screen and across the room?
Yes. So I love that you're saying that it's upping their game, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. And so yes, so when we're thinking of the how, right? How can we accomplish this? We're thinking about where we start, right? And it's really overwhelming again to think about how can we pull ourselves away from this. When it's everywhere. God, I mean, I think just here in Chicago, they just started putting up all these billboards for this AI companion, and it's a necklace that you can hang around your neck, and you
Did you
carry
say
it
a
with you.
necklace or a noose? What? A
Necklace,
necklace. Okay, sorry.
very scary. And so, right, spoken, my framework for change starts with self, right? How are you, one, acknowledging that these forces are pulling us apart, right? And I would argue, I think everyone has some kind of understanding, right? That something is encroaching on our day-to-day lives, right? And I think many people know that this is happening, but they brush it off. And one of the reasons that I think that they brush it off is so I'm thinking about this Derek Thompson, he's a writer for The Atlantic, and he wrote this essay where he talks about the three circles of community. And so there's the inner circle, right? Which is your family, right? Your blood relatives and your closest friends, right? So it's blood and kind of intimate connections, right? That's your inner circle. These are the people that you engage with the most, right? People who, for the most part, you could argue understand or know how you think or how you see the world, right? And of course, what that means is that there's confirmation bias there, right? That inner circle are people who are kind of an echo chamber, right? The second circle is the village, which we'll come back to. And the third circle is the tribe, right? And so the third circle, the outermost circle, the tribe, is people that you share certain affinities with, but you don't actually know kind of anything deeper than that, right? So, for example, my tribe would be other Puerto Ricans, right? I don't know these other Puerto Ricans across the world very personally. I don't know what their certain politics are or anything like that. But this tribe is a group of people that I believe I have some kind of connection to because of this identifier, right? And so Thompson talks about how we are losing the middle ring. The middle ring, the village, are people that you are familiar with, but not intimate with, right? And in this space of familiarity, but not intimacy, is where you get democracy. It's where you have a battleground, a space where you can have discussions of disagreement and compromise, right? Because the inner circle is most likely not going to present you with something that is very different from your mindset. And the tribe is not a layer of community that you are going to engage with on any deeper level. And so this village are friends of friends, coworkers, people that you meet in third spaces, which I'll get back to, right? And so when we start with self, it's acknowledging that something is pulling you away from the people around you and asking yourself, how am I engaging with that middle ring? Am I just going day to day, engaging with my close circle, with kind of these affinity groups that Instagram creates, that X creates, that Facebook creates? And where is this middle ground of people that I can have a conversation with, right? And we're going to disagree. And how do we handle that?
It's almost like you're describing the echo chambers that we, through that middle layer being destroyed, that we get pushed into.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because one of the things you talk really are able to empower people with is this idea, again, of that tension of understanding, hearing, being connected to those around us, but that comes with friction because the echo chambers are easy to curate online. I, have a political stance. I have a cultural issue that I'm engaged in, or whatever that might. I even affiliation with a particular team. Still an Eagles fan, but I'm not going to connect with those Dallas Cowboy fans. But whatever that is that we have our passions about, that the algorithms and the lack of that real interpersonal connection, I think has shed away some of our ability to navigate the differences of opinions, to navigate the hearing someone, understanding what they're saying, and trying to negotiate that maybe conflict with your ideas, your beliefs, your understandings. And how do we navigate that skillfully and in a way that deepens a relationship? I think those are some of it's not just your framework, but a skill set that you help people understand. And it's not just civic engagement. How do political parties come to an understanding? We're talking about how do individual people navigate. Maybe it's in that family we were given, that family we choose as an anarchist of relationships. But can you talk a little bit of how you uplevel people's skills in engaging in those areas of friction outside our echo chambers?
So, moving along the spoken framework, right? Um, the next two letters, P and O, power and openness, right? And so when I name power, it is in some ways acknowledging that friction, right? I mean, as a baseline understanding, I would hope that many people accept and understand that certain people have certain privileges in our cultural societal context, right? They have certain power because society has given them this power, right? Whether that's being straight, that's being male, that's being white, right? And so it's acknowledging that we are always going into connections, conversations with others with these dynamics, right? And so, in going into these spaces where there's going to be friction, one, I say accept it. We have to embrace this friction because we are being sold spaces without friction, or at least control of the friction, right?
Mhm.
I'm thinking very recently of my mom who was on Facebook and said, oh, one of her friends on Facebook kept posting about something that she didn't like. And so she clicked the snooze button on him, which means that she won't see any of his content for 30 days, I think is how it works, right? Um, we should not be able to snooze people. We should not be able to block people right from our lives. Unless of course, and I'm sure we're going to get into this, right? There are firm boundaries that need to happen if we're talking about harm, right? But in a general sense, we are being sold more and more opportunities to not engage with friction, right? To not engage with people who do not share our same opinion, right? Um, and the way that we work on this is openness, right? We have to be open to someone sharing something that is going to change our perspective in some way, right? And I'm not saying we're not talking about miracle, like complete transformation. I'm going to have one conversation with someone, right? And it goes back to what you were saying, right? We're not practicing to be perfect. We are just practicing because the practice itself improves our social fitness.
Yes.
Right. When we have an argument with someone, we are improving our social fitness. Right. Just as when we are having a conversation where someone understands and sees us. Right. And so, how do we do this? Right. It means taking and evaluating what your routine looks like, right? Because we start small. And so it's a question of how are you spending your time? And are you creating opportunities to engage with people who are different than you? Right. And so one suggestion I always give people is scheduling a weekly third space, right? And so our first and second spaces are usually work, home, school. how are you scheduling a third space that is none of those, right? And this could look like working at a community garden. It could look like a pickup basketball game. It could look like a faith community, right? Where are you engaging with these third spaces where you can build in an openness to an encounter that is going to be different than what you are getting from your family day to day, right? Which is not um it's not an indictment of those people or that community, but our literal society is also built again on this village, on this middle ring, and we are losing every day this engagement with this middle ring. So how are we forcing ourselves in our routine, right? Just once a week to be in a space where friction can happen, right? And accepting that friction is not always a bad thing.
And that third space is a space. It is not a virtual space. It is not, this is in community, physical community with other humans. This isn't an AI chat engagement, and it isn't a, some sort of online dialogue. It's really with people. And what do you described, it sounds like that third space, an unspoken key element is that there's maybe a third purpose. Like, a faith community, there's an identity piece that is distinct from the individual that pulls people together. If they're in a community garden, it may be one particular interest, or I'm at that time in my life where I'm at a lot of kids sports activities with other parents. Like, but it's not their it's an independent piece of your identity that allows you to be in community with people who have a variety of other independent pieces of their personalities as well. I think that's a that's a great practice. It's a great habit to develop. And one of the pieces you touched on that I want to come back to is um, what is that hard boundary, and how do we identify it? And is it always the same? You're talking about the idea of harm. Um, Sometimes for some people, just hearing that friction at first, it puts them in a place that's uncomfortable but not harmful. Sometimes it's on the other side of that line and harmful. Where is that line? How do we find it for ourselves? How do we move it? Because I think there's health in us being able to decide almost deliberately where that line is, as opposed to it being decided by our environments. Could you speak a little to that?
Absolutely. And I want to connect it to what we were just saying with those third spaces, and also what you were just sharing, right? You're finding yourself at these sporting events, right? Whether we're talking about these sporting events or faith communities, right? I am not telling people to go and join a community that they have no baseline for, right? To do something completely out of character and join something that they, I don't know, would never normally do, right? Or to put themselves as a fish out of water, right? And so I'm naming that because these third spaces should have some kind of engagement that you are comfortable or familiar with, right? I'm assuming, I mean, I'm not assuming this. We're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, right? You have some kind of sports connection, right, to that. That is something that I would assume makes you feel some level of comfort, even if you are surrounded by other parents that you may not know or have a connection to, right? And so I'm naming that to say that that is one way to navigate uncomfortability, right? To say, at least I have this anchor in this third space, right? And I can build from there, right? But to your point, I know that yes, there are some people who immediately, if they are feeling like someone is not or if a group of people are not sharing their kind of understanding of the world, right? They're kind of checking out. And so to your point, I love that you said it's a movable line, right? We're not talking about a line in the sand. I like to say we're kind of talking about a living document, something that is constantly changing, and it's different for every person. Is the other thing, right? Um, and so for me, I have kind of two poles two ends that I like to think about when I'm considering uh is this a boundary? Is this a space where I am feeling harm, right? From a connection that I'm trying to build. And those two poles are on one side, it is generous assumptions, right? Generous assumptions and asking questions. For me, I like to think sometimes you'll like this in well, hopefully you like baseball. I like to think of the three strike rule sometimes, right?
Mm.
And that number can change for different people. I know I've talked about this with friends who they have a five strike rule, right? Or they have a certain number. And this is the one where how many times am I giving a generous assumption, right? Am I making space for someone who maybe is making a mistake, who is stumbling, who is saying something wrong, or who is still learning, right? And how am I asking questions to find out if that is the case, right? So that's one side. The other side is verbal feedback. If I am telling someone that they are being harmful, right? That they are, I don't know, using our connection for their own means, they're being disrespectful, they're being discriminatory, right? I have to say that. Again, that friction, right? Um, and I have to hear what they have to say in response, right? And so for me, those are two of my guiding poles, and they require vulnerability from me to say, "Hey, this is how I'm feeling about this, right? Can we talk about it?" Right? Versus, I know there have been situations I've been guilty of this where I've said, actually, I'm too afraid to say how I'm feeling about this. Maybe I'm going to step back, or maybe I'm going to step aside, right? I don't give someone the opportunity, right, to maybe figure out that this is a learning moment, right?
Mm.
But let's move to some harder boundaries, right? For me, what this comes back to is it's harm and power, right? Again, that P. I need firm boundaries, and firm boundaries become necessary if this is a historical pattern, right? If I'm seeing something that is happening again and again, where someone is putting the burden of a connection on me, or they are expecting me as someone who uh, has an identity that is marginalized to teach them, right? Um, if I am seeing a pattern of dehumanization, if I am seeing a pattern of erasure, right, of ignoring how I am feeling or my background or people I love, even, right? That is a hard boundary, right? If your safety is being compromised, your physical, emotional, or mental safety, right? We're not just talking about comfort here now, right? We're talking about your well-being, right? And then finally, and this one sadly this has happened to me often where my generous assumptions, my grace is being exploited, right? Someone knows that I have this 3 to 5 strike rule, right? Someone knows that I am giving these generous assumptions, and they are taking advantage of this, right? And in some ways, just making me absorb the kind of hits, right, that come from that, right? And so this is when you ask yourself some questions, right? Is my generosity being taken advantage of? Um, is there flexibility, right? Is there understanding in this dynamic, right? Or is this person being really rigid? And then also, am I being honored as a person, right? In my full identity, in my multiple identities, right? Um, or am I being kind of diminished to make space for this other person? Those are the situations where we're moving from an uncomfortable kind of learning connection or just connection in general to something that is actually harmful, and you should probably step away.
It's interesting the way you're describing it. We're encouraging people to go into conversation with each other and to really listen. And we're encouraging them to approach it with an openness that's driven by a curiosity to know. And in doing so, we're empowering other people to be vulnerable and that there's such power in that. On the other side of that is we might not always connect with what we hear because everyone on the other side of those dialogues are their own individuals with their own complexities. And we might not always like what we hear, but that shouldn't cause us to then drop that openness and to not approach with curiosity just because we start to hear things that create that friction, that instead we should be embracing the process itself, the friction that we see, and doing it with the grace that we want to be given as well. That's what I'm hearing in what you're describing, that the grace of that we hope people will give us and that we can expect from others, that in a mistake or in an opportunity to learn, that we are approaching it with those individuals and the things that we learn, that friction with the grace that we hope we will get as well.
And you're making me think of another point here too is and a sad fact of this work, right? Is that God, how many people have we lost who do not who no longer want to engage with that village because someone has treated them with harm, right? Because someone has shut them down, because someone has not seen them, right? How sad it is that the when you're being vulnerable and entering the spaces, you are taking a very big gamble, right? But it is like you're saying, it is in that gamble that we can become closer. We can be more interconnected. We can learn more about ourselves, improve our social fitness, right? Um, and yet it is a very scary thing that I'm asking people to do. And there might be consequences to this, right? Ripple effects. But I have to insist, right, that we keep pushing for this. And you're reminding me, I always want to make this really clear. We're talking a lot about individual actions, things that individuals can do. And the other part of this work for me is how do we start to make sure that or integrate this work into whether it be legislation at the policy level or school, right? There are countries where they still teach civics, right? I mean, in American history, we had a time where we taught classes in public schools. It was mandatory for every student where they took
Yep.
a civics class, right? Where it taught you how to be a good citizen of the country, right? Now, those classes are not always perfect, of course, right? And we've evolved many of those lessons and curriculums. But I want to acknowledge too that we are taking an extra burden as individuals because this is not this civic duty is not integrated into our society at large, and that is a huge challenge, right? A huge deficit, and at the same time, it is not impossible to accomplish. There are many countries who now are incorporating civics classes, incorporating media literacy classes, mandatory
Mm.
for all students in the early grade levels, right? And so I want to bring that up too as we're talking about the kind of consequences and the harm that might happen to individuals, where it is also a sad fact that we are not being backed up socially, societally, right, to engage in this hard thing.
There are very strong headwinds against that. And if you think about, the polls again, one side, it's, all people are skilled at and open and curious, right? That they are all engaging in community this way. And on the other side, no one is. That the more we can move toward that skill set and the openness and the behaviors and the attitudes and just the desire to create community in a vulnerable and open way by people sharing and hearing stories, and that ability to communicate through friction and understand and with grace, that the more we can push at that. And so the last question I have for you is thinking at that meta level. It's almost like it's a mosaic, and each individual tile is beautiful, and it's more beautiful in whole. What can students that are leaders, what can educators, what can those that work with students at administrative levels, what can they do? What's one piece of advice to not just think about the up leveling of skills and thinking about these frameworks for their students and those they serve, what can one thing that they can keep in mind to push toward activity, toward behavior change, toward a movement onto that level of more people being able to do this? What's one, can't solve it all, but what's one piece of advice that you could share with those student leaders, those educators, and those maybe the campus-based administrators as they're approaching this work?
I guess I'm going to cheat a little. I'm going to say two things.
Okay.
One is the base level understanding that of how this work cascades, right? Small actions become norms. Norms create values. Values drive behavior, and behavior spreads like wildfire, right? My big suggestion is do not overthink it. The small action that you do to check in with one person has ripple effects, especially if you are in a position where you are a leader and representing your group, your organization, your business, right? Each small action, and I'll give you a small action as an example. It's the two-question check-in. You are very familiar with this. Everyone in America is familiar with this. You see somebody, you haven't seen them in a while, whether if it's a stranger or someone you know, you say, "How are you? What's up?" Maybe that person answers. Most likely they are not genuinely answering, right? They're saying, "I'm good, I'm fine." Da, da. The two-question check-in, ask a follow-up. It's as simple as that. And your first question can still be, "What's up? How are you?" But what is that second question? And bonus points if your second question shows that you remember something about them from their past, from something they have brought up to you. Hey, I heard you had that really hard test in that class. How'd that go? Right? Um, hey, I remember you saying that you had to help your cousin move. Did that go all right? Right? Um, it starts that small, right? And when someone feels that from you and that it's consistent, they start to see that as the norm for whatever space that you represent. And that norm, like I said, becomes a value. Oh, this place values me. This place values what I think, who I am, right? My day-to-day life, right? And those values, once you establish and someone tells someone else, "Hey, this place, there's some good people here," right? That makes others want to not just be a part of that, but also check themselves when they are not engaging in that value system that person has established for this space, right? um, the second smaller like piece of advice, I really like this quote. Being annoying is the price to pay for community. We are in the most socially connected time, and yet people are still saying, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Didn't mean to call you at this time. Sorry, I'm going through something." It's always this sorry, this apology, this thing. But what studies have shown is that when you are annoying, are imposing, are maybe in your mind thinking that you're being a little rude. Maybe you're calling someone after 9 p.m. Maybe you are asking for someone to help you carry a couch up some stairs. Maybe you are asking someone to be present while you have a hard phone call, right? Studies have shown that this feeling of neededness, when someone feels that they are needed by another, it improves their understanding of themselves. It improves their social fitness, right? And so I am asking people that maybe start with just one moment where maybe you're about to reach out to someone, you're about to ask for help, and maybe you stop yourself, right? And you say, "Oh, I'm imposing. I'll bother them," right? I want you to remember that feeling of neededness is profound, and that asking someone to help for help not just helps you, but it actually makes them feel better. It releases that oxytocin. It makes them have a physical reaction to reaching out and supporting you.
Love it. I hear ask the second question, but not just how are you? How are you? Ask that second question and give people the gift. Be vulnerable enough to give people the gift of being needed by asking for help, by opening up the opportunity for someone to provide value to you in a way that you need. I love it. Noel, thank you so much. I know the work that you do in both small, building those individual mosaic by people upskilling their ability to tell and to share and to hear stories and allow those stories to connect us. I know that it's impacting communities, and communities are closer, and people are more skilled at doing it because of the work you're doing. And we're glad to have you on this conversation, and people can get to know you and bring you to their campuses and work with their communities. And we'd love to be able to help you do that as we extend this webinar series, this conversations with some of our amazing speakers. Thank you for being here today, Noel.
Thank you so much, David.